Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and the Mandalorian Season 3 finale is finally here. There's lots of Easter eggs, hidden details, and things going on with this episode, and throughout this video we're going to be breaking down the entire entry and talking about where it leaves things off. I also want to give my review of the season so far, so stick around until the end of the video where we talk about the good, the bad, and also the Grogu. We'd massively appreciate it. We'd love you guys if you hit that thumbs up button for the final time, and with that out of the way, let's get into the episode. Now, last week saw the Mandalorian travelling to Mandalore in order to go into the Great Forge. Here they found Moff Gideon's forces and discovered that they'd been mining Beskar from the planet in order to create the next stage of the Dark Trooper. Now, we also pointed out in our breakdown last week that the troopers and jetpacks may be Imperial super commandos, and I believe this is now being confirmed by the creative team. Either way, he had Din escorted out for a debriefing, and we ended with him unleashing his Praetorian gods on Paz. Rocking Mandalorian-inspired masks, they then kill Paz Vizsla, leading to a big cliffhanger that takes us into this week. Now that starts off with Bo Katan and co racing through the underground while she reaches out to axe Woves. The signal breaks up, and last week we talked about how it was weird that no one could get a signal out through the storms, but Moff Gideon was holding 4K hologram meetings with the Shadow Council. Huge shoutouts to a lot of you though who pointed out that the Imperial base is actually likely jamming the comms, which might be the case, though the signal does drop out the higher axe gets. Anyway, back on the ground we see Bo firing away at the troopers, and you might notice that the blasts hit the armor but don't affect the person beneath. Ryan Airy pointed out in his breakdown last week that the only time the troopers go down is for $5, just like his mom. Now the only time the troopers go down is when they're hitting the unprotected areas like their neck and shoulders. They're also of course weak to explosives, which we see Bo blasting in order to get away. Really nice Star Wars wipe here, and we watch as Mando does the classic cliche prison escape sequence as he's taken towards the debriefing room. Using flame and breaking necks, they again have to think around the armor in order to best their opponents. Mando's almost beaten though, but Grogu comes in and saves the day, even using the healing mist that the IG droid did during episode 8 in the first season. Mando tells him that if they don't fight back, then they'll never stop running, and this is a very important lesson for the young Padawan Mandalorian to be learning at this point. The season so far has been filled with Mando telling him lots of lessons like this, and yeah, it's nice that they carry on this aesthetic throughout this episode too. I've mentioned this several times in the other breakdowns, but I do see Grogu as being the future of the Mandalorians, and he's kind of following in the footsteps of Tar Vizsla. He was both a Jedi and a Mandalorian, and thematically we have the idea in this series that the best leaders are people who unite people because of their life experience. I think in real life that works the best too, and to me, the best leaders are always people who've seen the sides of people they're ruling over because they have an understanding of what things are actually like. Not to wade too far into politics, but we've seen over the last couple of centuries how leaders that were born into the elite often don't have the life experience of being poor to actually understand how their decisions affect those on the breadline. That's why I think Bo will be a good leader, because she's seen things from a lot of sides and knows the needs of the Mandalorians. Now Grogu can do this too, and we know from Yoda and Yaddle that his species have long lifespans, and this also comes with a lot of wisdom. Though all of the characters in this series will be dead in 200 years, spoiler alert, Grogu will still be alive and likely with the Mandalorians. Due to his ability to use the Force, he'll also probably be an extremely skilled warrior, and both his lifespan and wisdom will make him the perfect leader. I'd like to see how things shake out far in the future, and though we're getting that movie with Rey set 15 years after Rise, I'd be interested to see things down the line away from the Skywalkers. Anyway, after the title sequence, we get the troops on both sides mounting up. Titled The Return, this finale is basically dishing out what's almost all-out action, and we also learn the truth about what's really going on with the cloning tanks. Wasn't what we thought, but there are some ways it can set up things that happen down the line. We see the Mandalorians taking to the skies, and also watch the TIE interceptors start dropping in. Hanging like bats, these were of course also used in the attack on Bo's home, and last week the Moff ended up requesting more of these from the Shadow Council. They're known for their speed, and alongside the bombers, they head out to the capital ship. Gideon looks over a map of the location, and nice little detail, Grogu, he's got green marker, eh? Shout out to whoever in the graphic design department did that. Now Mando then reaches out to the hero of the rebellion, aka R5. We see him using his own little jetpack, and this is something R2 busted out at the start of Revenge of the Sith. Man has to be stealthy as cause as we know, there's stormtroopers in those corridors, and there's also even a little mouse droid that passes by. These first appeared in A New Hope, and were what Chewbacca scared off when Han and Luke were pretending he was a prisoner. Similar to that Death Star scene, R5 also hacks the terminal the same way that R2 did, and we even see a little white block popping out like it did in that film. Out in space, we see his axe alerts the other Mandos to what's happening on the surface, and he remains behind on the light cruiser to use it as a decoy. I love the way the gauntlets cut through the clouds, missing the interceptors by seconds, and the cover allows them to get to the planet undetected. Elsewhere, Mando makes it to the barrier shields, and as we pointed out last week, these appeared in the Phantom Menace on Naboo. Activating them one by one allows Mando to basically John Wick his way through the forces bit by bit, rather than rushing them all at once. Again, he has to aim at the weak points and use his brains to get around the armor. Now, one thing we didn't mention last week is that Moff Gideon's possibly plundering Beskar because of what's happened in the past. He's looking to evolve the Dark Trooper, and we saw at the end of Season 2 how Luke was able to cut through them like a hot knife through butter because they weren't capable of blocking lightsabers. Beskar is though, which is likely why he chose the material to become part of his armor. Now as Mando works his way through, we see the mouse droid setting sirens off, and I must admit, this new design addition did make me smirk. R5 has to bust out another R2 trick to get a Descarpa, and it really adds some tension to this hallway fight. These are starting to become a staple of Star Wars, and we of course had Luke doing it in Season 2, which built off the back of his father doing it in Rogue One. Eventually Mando makes it through, and R5 is swarmed by mice, like it's some weird old fairy tale. Now at this point we see the cloning tanks, and learn the truth about what's really going on. Gideon is actually trying to make more Gideons, rather than him being the one who clones Snoke. In all honesty, I was kinda disappointed with this reveal, and it does feel like they brought the cloning thing in originally to explain what happened with Palps. I do feel like that's what Mando was originally setting things up for, as they even played notes from Snoke's theme in Season 2 Episode 4. So I believe that was the intention originally, but they've now moved things across to make it so it's something they can drag out. Looking back at the Shadow Council last week, it now seems that they've hijacked that plot to run it in other shows. We know that Thrawn's involved with the Ahsoka series, and I'm guessing we're going to see more things playing out there. After our breakdown last week with Project Necromancy, I actually saw a lot of good theories about what happened with Palps, and several of you guys said that the reason Gideon might not have seemed that interested is because he was working on his own one that was actually cloning Snoke. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but the Council discovering what Gideon was actually up to could make them realize that they can have other clones in place like Snoke that the Empire can use as leaders. We discover later on that he was actually attempting to wield the Force, and he was going to implant this into his clones. This discovery could be brought across into Project Necromancy, and it may be utilized to prop up their own leader. I think it will be all built up from that, with us likely seeing how things connect from this to the sequel trilogy. Star Wars has this weird thing with Disney where because they never really had a plan, they're now trying to retroactively fill in the blanks to make things make sense. For example, the sequel trilogy wasn't originally meant to have Palpatine in it at all, and they only added him as the villain in Rise at the last minute. Him somehow Palpatine returning was explained due to cloning, so now they're kinda having to go back and explain why this was always the case when it never really was. I think that's one of Star Wars' biggest issues, where they don't really have a plan and just throw things out there with the idea of like, we can figure this all out later. Anyway, the Shadow Council are kinda like the new Rebels, and just like how Luthen and Mon Mothma had their secret meetings, these guys do too. They also appear in a circular formation, similar to the Knights of the Round Table from the stories of King Arthur. This means that there's not really a leader, they all get to voice their opinion equally, and there's not that person sat over everyone. Now Gideon doing this to me is him basically making his own council that can rule the galaxy. Say he had a version of himself in every sector, he could run the entire galaxy, and he wouldn't actually need the Shadow Council at all because his face would be the face of the Imperials. Using the Force would help him get the reputation of someone like Vader, and thus people would be too afraid to fight him because he'd be everywhere at once. This would mean that he would have an advantage that the Mandalorians don't have, which is that they tend to just have one leader. However, that often isn't the case, and the main reason that they constantly fall into civil wars is because there are two people out there constantly attempting to get power. However, having him be every leader negates this from happening, so you can kinda see why he did it. A huge shout out to Ryan Arif pointing out the difference between the two sides. We've seen how with the Shadow Council that they're all very much kind of out for themselves. Moff Gideon's of course working on his cloning project, some want Thrawn, and there's others that just want Palps back. I just want him back. Now the Shadow Council itself was actually formed during Project Cinder, which was basically a contingency plan put in place in case the Emperor died. This involved the Imperials firing on themselves, and this was so that the Republic couldn't salvage their supplies. Bill Burr's character Miggs talked about this in Season 2, and he brought up how the Imperials turned on him and his friends and wiped them out in their thousands. The Shadow Council was very much part of this too, and it was created to bring the Imperial warlords together so that they could all be killed at the Battle of Jakku. However, this plot failed, and thus they were able to carry on in the shadows. Either way though, they're all very much out for themselves, whereas the Mandalorians represent putting their differences to the side and coming together. Anyway, the survivors take the Mandos to a hidden part of the planet that's become an underground garden. The survivors have thrived here by cultivating farms, which sprung up after most of the Mandalorians left. This is actually what the planet used to look like before the Civil Wars destroyed the surface, and it shows that life can return to this planet once more. The Mythosaurs are very much symbolic of the natural life of Mandalore returning, and this will usher in a new era for the planet. Now, the armor actually prophesies that this long-thought extinct species returning would herald in the rise of a Mandalorian leader, and thus Bo seeing it in episode 2 very much made that prophecy true. The Mythosaur was actually originally the top of the food chain on the planet when the Tongs first arrived millennia ago. Amongst them was Mandalore the Great, who bested one in combat, and thus the Tongs named the entire planet after him. He made the first Mandalorian helmet out of its bones, and the Mandalorians then tamed the beasts and started to ride them. We actually had some foreshadowing back to the return of the Mythosaur in the first season, when Queel said this during one of the episodes. Can't remember which one, but it happened.
Your ancestors rode the great Mythosaur. Surely you can ride this young foal.
So they have a long history connected to the Mandalorians, and having one return very much ushers in a new era for them in this reformed galaxy. I'm guessing that we will end up seeing them being ridden at some point, but let me know below. Anyway, the armor returns to the planet, and she brings the others with her. Now, we have been theorizing for a while now that the armor is indeed recast, and she was one of Darth Maul's followers when he took over. We don't get that confirmed in this season, unfortunately, and the Moff Gideon spy theory also goes out the window too, as she's not part of his group either. The main connection with her and Gideon was the fact that they both had horns on their helmets, which is something that the followers of Darth Maul did. These were of course meant to echo his fearsome appearance and show loyalty to the Sith Lord. Now, Maul was basically the kind of leader that the Mandalorians thought was perfect for them due to him being a pretty ruthless warrior. However, he was a bit of a bad bloke, and thus those against him spent a lot of time trying to oust him. Alas though, this isn't the case, and I'm kinda glad I didn't end up making the big theory video I was gonna, cause man's already taken enough L's this year in theory time. Anyway, back with Mando and Gideon, we see them facing off against each other. Gideon reveals what's going on, and kinda feels like a villain monologue to explain why he's doing the cold thing with the cloning. I thought it was forced. But Mando puts up a pretty good fight. However, it all goes to hell once the Praetorian Guards show up. Now, in case you missed our last video, the Praetorian Guard name actually pulls from the Roman Empire, and these highly skilled soldiers were tasked with protecting high-ranking officials. These were people like senators and politicians, and that's also very much the same case here. Now, these are based off the Emperor's Royal Guard, and you'll likely recognize them as being from Return of the Jedi. They were the best of the best of the best, sir, and were trained in all styles of combat, including Terras Cassi. This made them adept fighters, and like we saw in The Last Jedi, they were even capable of going toe-to-toe with Jedi. Now, they best Mando quite easily and then rush off to Grogu, because I'm guessing he's still the number one target due to him being a Force wielder. Elsewhere with Bo, we watch what's actually a pretty cool live-action version of the Mando fights that showed up in the Clone Wars. Though I'm kinda met on this finale, there were bits like this that really stood out and felt like the creative team were trying to show us things that we hadn't seen before in live action. Eventually it leads to Bo coming in to rescue Mando so that he can go and save the kid, and she ends up going toe-to-toe with the Moff. This is of course building off the back of last week, with Bo admitting that she surrendered to Gideon originally. Here though, she's standing up to him, which is character arc. Now, this allows Mando to go against the Praetorian Guards, and Grogu busts out the Force to help his father. Axe brings the axe down on the base, aiming the crashing ship to put a hatchet in Gideon's plans. Now, he promises to give Bo a warrior's death, and this is a nod to how Vikings believed that one had to die in glorious battle in order to see Valhalla. They of course had a warrior culture, much like how the Mandalorians do, and I appreciate how they at least give a nod to that. At this point the Darksaber's broken, and though it could be seen as something tragic, I think it's actually good in the grand scheme of things. Bo did never really want the Darksaber in the first place, and it kinda became this mystical MacGuffin that everyone was fighting and dying for. It holds far too much power, and thus it being destroyed can allow the superstitious Mandos to drop their beliefs and actually come together. In the end, the Darksaber divided far more people than it united, and this also means that the leadership can't be swapped out so easily. It could get to a point where democracy actually comes into place rather than who wins in a fight, and thus this violent warrior mind state won't be the main thing needed in a leader. This just leads to more war and leaders of Mandalore being violent because the only way to be a leader is to achieve it through combat. That's what I think anyway, and we watch as the ship crashes down, killing Moff Gideon. I know he can come back through cloning, but I really hope that he doesn't, and that this is actually his death because we've got bigger fish to fry now. Man's been beaten like 3 times in a row now, so I am hoping that they get others involved, and this could even come in the form of Hux and Pelion. They've always been restricted to the Legends and expanded lore so far, but them being in live action and having goals likely shows what the creative team are planning. We have several sides, and with Pelion being Thrawn's second in command down the line, I think he's very much going to follow in the Legends outline and become his right-hand man. Pelion was part of a group known as the Imperial Remnant, and he was also someone who signed a treaty with the New Republic that helped end the war. I think we could potentially get lip service to things like this, whilst we see things falling into place for Pelion to prop up Thrawn as the leader. I was genuinely surprised that they went the way they did with the sequel trilogy with Snoke, and I think that Thrawn should have been the overall villain. I think they initially wanted a Palpatine and Vader standing in Snoke and Kylo, so they shied away from it, but we can very much explore what his rule would have been like in the Ahsoka series. As for Hux, we actually know what eventually happens with him, and I imagine that we'll see his son Armitage as a child in one of the upcoming shows. In case you don't know, Hux actually had an affair with a member of the kitchen team, and from this came his son Armitage. Armitage actually plotted and planned away with Captain Phasma, and together they used a toxin to poison him. He went to medical droids, but they were unable to see what was actually wrong with him, and this was due to the poison being extremely sophisticated. Thus he resigned himself to a Bacta tank and ended up dissolving into nothing, whilst Hux pushed the story that he travelled into unknown regions of the galaxy. Ahsoka is probably too early in the timeline to play that out, but by the time we get to Mandalorian Season 4, we could see the Huxes and maybe even Phasma getting involved. They might even reveal that she had ties to the Mandalorians or something because of the whole helmet thing. I'll not theory time that because we've taken an L today, but it just seems like something to think about. Now they may also be setting up the movie as well, and though I'm saying Season 4, we do know that Dave Filoni is working on that project. It will be set in the Mandoverse, and potentially that will pick up the threads here, rather than giving us a Season 4 down the line. Takes about 2 years to develop these things, and I'm guessing that effort can just be put into a movie, so we may be getting that, but if I say Season 4 again, yeah, you know I just mean the next chapter, mate. Don't kick off in the comments. Anyway, as the dust settles, we see that Grogu's protected Mando and Bo by using a force barrier. This pulls from the Legends, and it could be used both offensively and defensively. It can protect people like what we see here, or it can be used to stop someone from escaping. Huge shoutouts to Simon A. Berman on Twitter for pointing out this might actually be another Brofenbrenner's microcosmos theory, meaning that the inner circle is basically the closest relationships that you have. This is very much an inner circle / microcosmos thing, as we have a father and mother archetype along with a child. Anyway, the barrier saves our lives, and we cut to the living waters to see Paz's son once more in a scene that echoes the opening of the season. This is a baptism, and the water allows people to wash away their sins and be born again anew. Although Paz Vizsla's gone, it is possible that we'll see his legacy continue on through his son. Mandalorian legend is heavily tied in with his lineage, and the Jedi Mandalorian Tar Vizsla is one of his ancestors. Before his arrival, the Jedi and Mandalorians were sworn enemies, which is why a lot of their training centered around being able to tackle them. They have their personal combat shields built to deflect lightsabers, and also lots of gadgets and gizmos to counter their attacks. Tar walked both sides though, just like how Grogu does, and he united them with the Darksaber, being used as a symbol to bring them all together. When we were first introduced to Bo, she was also under the command of Pre Vizsla, who ended up being a wielder of the Darksaber. He was killed by Darth Maul, who then took the blade, and the leadership of the Mandalorians that were loyal to it. So there's definitely the possibility that his child will be a character that we follow down the line, and I do think they've taken a strong focus on him for that specific reason. This scene kinda reminded me of the ending of A New Hope, and it's seen as one big celebration for them beating the Empire. Now we also see Grogu being brought forward, and Mando once more busts out the technicalities to get him added to the song. He adopts Grogu as his son, and this of course reflects the ending of Season 2 in which he gave him away. He's now gone from foundling to apprentice, and this once more shows how similar that the Jedi and the Mandalorian are. Both took children at a young age and trained them, and their similarities are actually what Tar used to bring them all together. Now under the water, we travel down to see the Mythosaurs Eye once more, and this shows that the Mandalorians have once more built a home. We close out with Bo lighting up the Great Forge, which symbolically is the heart of Mandalore. Now, Bo Katan being anointed as the leader of the planet is something that's been a long time coming. Making her first appearance in the Clone Wars episode of Friend in Need, she's very much become the quote-unquote chosen one. Rebels ended with her getting given the Darksaber, and this scene's bringing things full circle from that, with her actually earning the leadership rather than being handed it. The Darksaber was something that sparked up the fire, but the forge being lit up builds upon that to show the fire's now continuing to burn. I think the series has basically been about Bo becoming the leader for real this time, and we end by showing that she's actually worth it. Hercules had his 12 labours, and Bo has been on a sort of journey similar to that. We've had Mythosaurs involved, the Darksaber, and she also comes from a royal bloodline. All these make her the perfect leader in a situation like this, but I do get the feeling that peace won't last too long. We have the fact that she basically enabled the Mandalorian purge by surrendering, which caused millions of deaths. You can see how this will rub a lot of people the wrong way, and we may see more civil wars coming down the line. Mandalore's a planet that's been racked by them, and we may see another one slowly being sown here with Bo as the leader. That's kind of why I lean more with Grogu, as he doesn't really come with the baggage, and showed last week with Axe and Paz that he can handle the situation. He's got the warrior side of him from the Mandalorians, but also the patience that comes with doing the Jedi training. He could also fit the title The Mandalorian. He's been there from the start, yeah, he was there episode 1, and thus I think with him as a focus, everything just makes so much more sense. But going off. Let me know if you agree or not, and with the Darksaber gone, it could be the case that the leadership isn't contested as often as it used to be. We also have the fact that Bo's beaten Gideon as well now, so potentially the surrendering will be overlooked because she's righted the wrongs of the past, much like how Mando bathed in the living waters. That's what the baptism before could signify, and maybe the characters are all getting fresh starts. Now Ahsoka's next up, and I think we'll likely see Bo popping up in that at some point. It's heavily tied in with Rebels, even recreating the ending of that in live action to show us how much they want to build off the back of it. Now with Sabine Wren returning, I think we'll possibly see Bo brought across in some way or another. With Mandalore being a big planet that the Empire is seeking after, it can be pulled into the war against Thrawn at some point down the line. Ahsoka is an ally of Bo too, and we were actually introduced to her during the Ahsoka-centered episode. Thus I think we'll see her return in some form or another, similar to how Mando showed up in Book of Boba Fett. They might even do something similar to that where we get standalone episodes that get us up to speed with things before we head into Mando Season 4. Anyway, we cut to Mando venturing out to a rebel bar. Look at Grogu walk, mate. Looks like a bloody puppet. Anyway, little cameos here in the corner, and you can catch series creator Dave Filoni. Next to him is what I believe is Peter Ramsey, who directed the TV-centric episode earlier in the season. Guessing that this was shot back to back with that scene to make it easier, and the director just popped in to say hello. Grogu spots an IG helmet, and I think it would be pretty cool if this was IG-88, but that might be me reaching. Mando does end up taking it either way, and this is dropped on IG-11, who becomes the Marshal over Cara Dune. Anyway, Mando has brought a proposal with him, and he promises to protect the Outer Rim and even hunt down some of the Imperial remnants. This could potentially lead into Hux Imperial stuff, or it may potentially even tie in with Thrawn. We know from Star Wars Celebration that he will be played by Lars Mikkelsen, which I must admit is a pretty cool thing. Mikkelsen also played him in the animated shows, and we can potentially look at the expanded lore to see what they're going to do with him. I already explained his backstory in the last video, so if you want to see that, then head over after this. If you want to know his future though, we do kind of have a rough outline of it. Obviously, Disney have retconned a lot of stuff, so they might not stick to this, but Thrawn was eventually killed by his own bodyguard Rook. Stabbed in the back during the Battle of Billy Bringby, his final words were, "But it was so artistically done." Rook was killed fleeing his ship the Chimera, and Thrawn himself was actually resurrected in the expanded lore 10 years later. I think they'll drop all of this, in all honesty, and probably have him taken out by one of the major characters in the run. I can't see him being killed in Ahsoka though, and instead I think he'll likely be a major antagonist in all the shows going forward that kinda ties them all together. Now we end with Mando getting a place on Navarro just by the flats, and we see him chilling on the porch as he raises his son Grogu. Mando, he doesn't take off his helmet or anything, so there never being those Pedro Pascal wasn't on set rumours, but it's a nice way to end the episode and also the season, even if I did have my problems with it. I think unfortunately this entire thing just suffers from that Disney Plus finale syndrome, which if you've been watching all the shows then you know exactly what I mean. They all just kind of devolve into mindless action, and the plot threads that they set up, though they give us answers, they don't really feel like they knocked it out of the park. It's often the simplest route taken so that it doesn't affect other shows, and yeah, personally I always feel like they chicken out. The only time they haven't done that is the season finale of Loki, and that didn't devolve into all-out action, actually had some character building, a big choice at the end, and then it left things off on a cliffhanger. The other shows though, however, they often do kind of drop the ball, but yeah, let me know your thoughts below, because I know I've been massively negative on this series, but I have definitely felt like this has fallen short. Now, as for my thoughts on the whole series, I think this was an alright season, but it definitely didn't feel like it lived up to the hype that this potentially had. There was apparently a lot of backstage meddling, which I'll go into in just a bit, and once you hear this, I think a lot of the issues with the series will start to make more sense. Up top though, I want to start with the good, and I think they really told a well together put redemption arc for Bo Katan. This took her from being the obscure Clone Wars character, and to me she's now one of the big names in the Star Wars canon. I think the main plot with her was worth coming back to week, and it's great seeing the Mandalorian culture as a whole explored in more ways than what we've typically got in the past. This is a lifestyle that's on its last legs, and the series focused on them rising back up and regaining their home. I think the production values of the series were really strong too, and when you compare this to an MCU show, it's head and shoulders above it in terms of designing costumes. Those aerial battles with the pirates, the ones in space, Mandalore, Coruscant and so on, it seems like they're all ripped out of films instead of just being TV shows. I think that works really well, and when the series hits its stride, it all comes together perfectly. That Keller and Beck moment, I tell you, seeing my man Ahmed Best, he's back, baby. Now, on the opposite side of this though, I feel like a lot of the elements of the series kind of distracted from the main thrust, and I think once I talk about the rumours around the season, that'll all make a lot of sense. Now, Josh from Den of Nerds talked about what he'd heard was happening, and it definitely feels like it lines up with the issues that we've seen with Star Wars in general. Josh said that Lucasfilm had no idea how popular Grogu was going to be at the end of Season 1, and once that toy money started coming in, they realised he was a big cash cow. Season 2, of course, ended with him going off with Luke, and then the studio head stepped in after they realised they needed him back in the show ASAP. Thus, the arc Mando was meant to have in Season 3, which would involve getting him back, was then shoved into Book of Boba Fett so that he could be back into the series come Season 3. This apparently annoyed the team behind the show as they lost one of the main plot points they were planning on having in Season 3, and they also had to deal with the fact that Gina's show had been cancelled too. From what's been said, elements of the Rangers show were then forced into this, which is why we have a lot of focus on the Rebels and Coruscant in some episodes. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's something that was reported a while back, and it seems to at least hold some merit when you watch this season. I think that my main problems do kind of lie with that as well, and I think we kind of lost what made us fall in love with the show, which was the focus on Mando and Grogu. That's how the series originally started, but it's kind of morphed into the show about making Bo Katan the leader. Mando and Grogu have both taken a back seat in their own show now, and I think if you're a big fan of the first two seasons, then there's a chance you might feel disconnected. I know the ist and phobe words might get thrown around, but I think there are people who might just lose interest because it's not what they originally connected to. Those that don't have a strong connection to the Clone Wars might just not have the interest in Bo that we do, and the viewing figures being down could be because of this direction change. Grogu might as well not have been in a lot of these episodes, and I think that the season would have actually been stronger if they'd stuck with the original plan to have more of his training away from Mando, whilst Mando tried to make his own way in the galaxy. Now, I know a lot of people's problems are that Mando is now basically a secondary character in his show, and though I have kind of brought that up, as a Clone Wars fan, I do find the Bo parts really interesting. If we have to follow someone else, then I am glad it's her, but it does make me wonder if those rumours about Pedro Pascal all the way back in Season 1 and 2 were in fact true. With the direction moving away from him, I am starting to wonder if they realised they'd given him too much power and then decided to shift things up so it wasn't so reliant on him. It's just me guessing, but yeah, if these things are true, then you can tell how they impacted the story, and though we have some really great entries here, it doesn't feel like the cohesive vision that the prior two seasons were. There's some very out of place things here, and yeah, it just kind of lowers the overall score that I give this series. There's definitely a feeling of studio interference here, and when you start having pop stars cameoing things, that definitely feels like a move by one of the hires up and not those actually running the show. If you've ever seen Extras, they actually do a bit in that with the in-show sitcom Andy's running, and the BBC basically force him to have Chris Martin show up in the series unexplained so that he can sing a song. That show's about 20 years old now, but yeah, things like that still definitely happen. I still think there's good things in the show though, but minor things that piled up over the 8 episodes stopped it from achieving the greatness that it could have had. I also think they kinda dropped the ball a bit with the whole Bo and Mando thing, and instead of us getting actual conflict between the pair, we just had the darksaber getting handed over, which lowered the stakes a lot. Kinda compare it to Westworld, which I really loved, but lots of people fell off it, and now if you bring it up they're like, that series was crap. If you think back the first season was incredible, and it got so many people on board to the point that by season 2 it had a really big fan base. Though I enjoyed season 3 and 4 of the show, I can see why others didn't, because it moved so far away from what it was originally. That's kind of what I think happened with The Mandalorian as well, and whether people come back next time I think isn't so much of a guarantee as it used to be. Anyway, that's kind of my overall thoughts, and let me know yours in the comments below. We are in a competition right now and giving away the Quantumania Steelbook to 3 subscribers on the 15th of May, and all you have to do to be on the chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the episode. We pick the comments at random on the 15th, and the winners of the last one are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out one of our breakdowns on screen right now, which is gonna be a fun one, I promise you. Hopefully I'll see you over there after this, and with that out of the way, thanks for sitting through the video. I've been Paul, I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.